Welcome to Pardon My Hunch, the show about the real decisions we make in business and in life, and the gut instincts that we trust or wish we hadn't ignored. As always, the show is brought to you by the Vibe Method, which is a process that we use and teach innovators and marketers to help them nail a unique customer story and prove it will sell before they ever build, scale, or launch the real thing. To find out more about how we can help you nail a killer vibe before you go live, you can go to gohunch.com. Now let's get on with the show. Today we have Josh Gryniewicz.
Yep.
Gryniewicz. Yeah, got it. How many times do I need to say it? He is the founder and chief narrative strategist and storytelling connoisseur for a company called Odd Duck. And tell us a little bit about Odd Duck, because I think I will not do it justice.
Sure. Thanks, Terry. It's great to be here. I really enjoy your show. Odd Duck is a storytelling for social change consultancy. We work primarily in the health and public influence space, and we help build narrative frameworks to reach your audience and craft and curate stories that will actually have impact and resonate with them.
That's awesome. So, what's an example of a company or an organization that you've helped?
So we have done stuff in the product space, so there is some overlap there with health tech startups.
Oh,
But
okay.
primarily, we work with health and hospital systems, foundations in the health sector, uh, you know, organizations, and a lot of community-based organizations to help kind of uplift the issue-based work that they're focused on in a narrative way. And so I think fundamentally, Terry, the difference between what we do and what a lot of folks who are out there, kind of working in the storytelling space is two things. One, we see narrative as infrastructure,
Hmm.
right? So fundamentally, everything that you're doing, including mapping with a narrative framework, which is how we approach things, is really everything in alignment. We're world building here, right? And so that's kind of a narrative infrastructure approach. The second thing is we differentiate story from narrative, right?
Oh, wow.
So
Oh, tell me more.
yeah. So our approach really looks at units of narrativity, right? Story, we all know story. It's the sauce we swim in, right?
Yeah.
Beginning, a middle, and an end. Though sometimes not necessarily in that order, especially for our Breaking Bad, Pulp Fiction fans out there, right? Um, and it has, but fundamentally, it tells a transition. There is a movement through story, but it is a unit. Narrative, on the other hand, is essentially the cultural, it's sort of cultural infrastructure, right? So it is broad reaching kind of philosophical ideas that have come together to form our attitudes, belief systems, and even values around how we perceive our world and our reality. And it's cobbled together of many different stories, anecdotes, micro stories, lore, you know, threads, on all
Yeah.
your socials, and that adds up to that kind of broader narrative.
Yeah.
And so our approach is let's figure out where your narrative, where the issue that you're focused on, or the product that you're promoting, or the work that you're doing, what narrative that lives in, right? What are the fundamental ideas that people have formed by that narrative, and do we need to disrupt it, assert ourselves in it, or kind of feed up stories that advance it, right?
Yeah.
And that's fundamentally our approach. And then we work back, reverse engineering. What are the stories that we need to tell to seed that conversation?
I love it. Well, I love story.
Thank you.
I love
Yeah.
I was saying earlier when we were talking, like we use the science and framework of a story in helping our clients figure out a unique angle, for their product or their brand. And it's like simple stuff. I'm not a creative writer by
Yeah.
background at all. I like to write, but I'm not a creative writing expert or a storytelling expert. But like once you realize there's like a framework and like there's some science to it, it's in terms of trying to bring people into the story and attract them. And you know,
Yeah.
I love
Well,
meeting people that do that have this expertise. I think more, especially if like when
thank you.
you're doing it like you said for to help people really figure themselves out and communicate because everybody has something to offer and at so many businesses they're not they're getting looked over because people aren't
A
hearing
hundred
the
percent.
message.
And there is a lot of static out there. There is a lot of noise, and it's very easy to kind of just get lost, right,
Mhm.
in articulating it. But when you look at things from like what narrative does your issue live in, it gives you a scaffolding, or what we refer to as a framework, to actually organize. So a lot of times, and I say this, and I've heard you talk to folks in past episodes about some of your approach, and it's very similar in the sense that a lot of times our clients really have all of this information in their heads
Oh
already.
yeah.
They
Yes.
just don't, and so the response is often like, oh, I've got to get something out there. I've got to do so. And like, so part of what our role is to slow things down and to say,
Mhm.
okay, there is a method to this madness, right? And we're going to tease that out of you, to be able to structure it in a way that's actually going to have impact.
Yeah, I love the slowing down. I mean, it's like everyone wants to be agile, speed up, and all these things. And I'm like, okay, first of all, agile, people like, do it in a day. I'm like, no, that's not what that. If you actually are borrowing the term from software
Right.
development, that's not what it means. It means like small bits, iterate. You got to be thinking while you're doing it. And I love the slow down piece. Not because we're not like I listen. I told a client recently, I'm like, listen, you can interview anybody in my life, and the last thing that they're going to use as a word to describe me is slow
Yeah.
pace. Yeah.
Yeah.
However, there's like, trust me on this. Like it's not going to take a long time, but we need to go on kind of some steps and
Yeah.
kind of doubt.
There
Like,
has to be a process. There has
yes.
to be a
Well,
process.
we want that as humans. Like we all
And
want, you know,
yeah,
we need it. Like and we lean in when we're okay. You're giving me a plan. There's steps. There's.
yeah,
Well, tell me. Okay, so odd duck. Okay. I want to get to my big question for you. A big
yeah.
question. What the odd duck? Where does the name?
Oh, well,
Yeah.
you've met me, so no.
Well, I
um,
honestly thought that. I don't think you're
yeah.
odd at all.
Oh, I'm very odd, but
Oddly good way. Oddly
so
cool.
I'm very neurodivergent. I have when I was first diagnosed with ADHD, the neuroscientist who I went to, because I went through a battery of tests, said,
Yeah.
"Oh,
Wow.
your attention deficit with extreme hyperactivity," and I was like, "Is that a new diagnosis? Because I haven't heard of that in the DSM." Um,
Oh God.
and I think, Teri, I spent a lot of my career feeling like the things that were most quirky and weird about me, that I had to conceal, to in the name of professionalism or in the name
Oh.
of what have you. And when I decided I was going to go out and do this, I wanted to fully own myself and my identity. And I'm an odd duck, so why not broadcast that?
I
you
love
know,
it. Yeah,
you know
it
what you're
takes
getting when you meet with me.
well, I love it. And I feel like God, you took me back to a memory of college and I had a professor and you could tell she like saw something in me, but I majored in Where's the Party, and I have like a kind of a I want to. I'm not the class clown, but I'm like the wingman to the class clown. I'm
Yeah,
like I
yeah.
want to be goofy. I want to keep it casual. I just hate formality. And I remember one time she said, "Why do you?" I mean, by the way, I got an A on this whole project that she gave me.
Okay,
At the same
okay.
time, she said, "Why do you have to be so goofy?" And I was like, and I actually usually I would shell, like, oh,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
said a
yeah.
professor, and I went on kind of a little diatribe of where I was in my life and all the things, and it like turned that she like she was like, oh, she had a realization. Now there have been other times in my life when I've not been so confident in my response. But it was one of the few times where I'm like, oh, my response, where you say, you think later what you wish you would have said.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
just
yeah,
wasn't defensive. I was like, this is where I am. And anyway, it reminded me of that. But I will say, gosh, throughout my career, I I want I want to goof off a little bit with, I don't
yeah,
want it to be so,
yeah,
I can't stand all the I mean, I have my own jargon is fine, but if I have to use like, we're going to democratize and leverage and all these things the way we talk in corporate America, like I cannot deal with it. I want to be, can't we be real and casual and ourselves and still take
yeah.
it seriously?
And it's honestly, it's both healthier and more creative. So a lot of the work that we do and a lot of the work that you do is creative, right? And if you set this tone where you have to fit everything into blinders and it has to be like like we were talking about, there can be a process, but then and there can be a process around serious things, and we can still have fun doing it.
I know.
And we're better
Well,
for it. We can
exactly.
still be
It's like,
goofy.
yeah, we're gonna be. I mean, it's taking me a while to just embrace. Like, I'm going. I might say hey to someone in an email. Like, it's like I'm not gonna be unprofessional, but I like casual
Yeah,
vibe. I really
yeah,
do. And some clients, I'll tell you, they're very. Not everybody goes for it. I'm not super, ridiculously casual, but anyway, you've kind
yeah,
of struck a chord with
yeah.
your
Well,
story.
good, good. You're also an odd duck, Terry.
I thought, hey, I'm all
Who
in.
knew? Well, you did.
Ducks, plural.
Yeah,
So, all right, I'm passionate about this topic of, you know, following or at least paying attention to your own instincts, especially once you have some experience under your belt. Those come from a place of observation and experiences. Those instincts are kind of earned. And, I see a lot of people, myself included, who something feels off and they kind of put it aside because maybe it's easier just to go with the generic advice or vague data or what have you.
yeah,
And I wondering, like, if you think through your own, it might come to you. You think of something with one of your clients, or I know you mentioned at your own moment, your own career, where you felt a pull, like you felt your instinct pulling you. And I'm curious what decision, what that was, what
yeah,
decision you made,
yeah.
like what happened.
Well, I would say actually, um, my entire career is defined by hunches, right? And even when I second guess myself or when I'm not listening to that voice, right? It's usually when things aren't playing out
Right.
correctly, right?
Like, why
So
didn't I see the red flag?
Exactly, and part of going back to why we're odd doc, like part of that quirkiness, part of that goofiness is also just making it okay and giving permission, including with clients, to be like, okay, maybe there is something here. But what I'll say, my origin story, right?
Yeah.
I was working for public health approach to public safety, pretty controversial program. I was a health communicator. Um, I was promoted to the director of communications. Uh, and part of my mandate was to help replicate and expand this initiative, this model, nationwide, right? We didn't have we had a strong base in Chicago and throughout the state, but we hadn't been replicated. There was and I know you're a data girl. There was a 4 university evaluation that spent 4 years looking at the data and demonstrating its effectiveness at up to 68% in communities, at reducing shootings and killings up to 68% in communities where it was being implemented. And so what we thought, Terry, was that once this evaluation hit, they had spent 4 years looking at the data, doing this research, that
Mhm.
folks would just roll out the red carpet. Who didn't want to get those results, who were
Right.
focused in this area? And so my job would be done for me, right? It would just be automated, right? And that, we would just be running around setting these programs up all over the country.
Yep.
So the evaluation drops, and nothing happens. Crickets, right? Uh, Around the same time, documentary film following three of the street level workers who were referred to as violence interrupters, uh, directed by Steve James, who did Hoop Dreams. I know you're a sports person. I
Yeah.
don't know if you remember that one, but it's one of the most successful documentaries in the history of documentaries. And Alex Kotlowitz, who wrote "There Are No Children Here," which was turned into a series by Oprah Winfrey. Um,
Oh, yeah.
and so the two of them did this, film following these workers, just through their day to day, how they actually did their work on the ground.
Is this sounding familiar? Has this film been released?
Yeah. I'm going back almost 20 years now.
Okay. Oh, okay. I mean,
Yeah,
I feel like I've said, okay, go on.
yeah.
Go ahead.
And so the film comes out. Teri, they don't get into the science, they don't get into the data, they don't get into any of the research. What they do is they tell and show these
Mm.
compelling stories of these three individuals. And everything that we thought was going to happen with this evaluation when it dropped happened with the documentary. And so for me, that was my hunch, that was my light bulb moment
Oh gosh.
of, oh, there is something to this story thing. And so I went back to grad school um, for English Lit and creative writing. And I said, part of my goal was I want to marry what I know
Mhm.
in health communications and behavior change with storytelling and narrative techniques. This is before it was ubiquitous and
Yeah.
everybody had a storyteller on their team, right?
Chief
And so
narrative officer, right? I've
a
seen
chief
these.
narrative officer,
Yeah.
Anthropic just shelled out $750,000 to hire a storyteller. I don't know how I missed out on that
Wait a minute.
opportunity.
Who? Which company?
Anthropic,
Oh,
AI,
they did? Wow.
AI, $750,000 to hire a storyteller.
Josh, they
I
should have
know.
come to you.
I'm telling you.
No, there's a reason. There's a reason you wouldn't have wanted it. Yeah.
But so yeah, so that was the big hunch payoff moment, was like, oh, there's something here and they can be connected,
What was
right?
the name of the
Like
documentary? What was the name
the
of that?
documentary was The Interrupters.
The Interrupters. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't think I've seen it, but the format, like the following these people around who are in on the streets trying to like interject, right, to prevent the. It was about
yeah.
violence, right? It's got
it was about violence. It
gun
was about
violence
violence, gun
specifically, or just
violence.
violence in
Yeah,
a. Okay.
all types of violence in the communities. Yeah,
And you have a book.
I do. Yeah, written with one of the stars
Oh
of the film.
wow.
Yeah, yeah. Interrupting violence. So we kept with that theme,
Yeah.
and it shares. It's a memoir, but it's using leveraging his personal experience and story to highlight some of these issues and this innovative program, right?
What was the so oh, okay. When did the book release? Has the book been out
So the
for a while?
book was released a couple of years ago.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
we
How's
did.
it doing?
It did great. It is
Yeah.
doing great. We were on we were a national bestseller. So USA Today made the list, and we were released at the same time that well, we made the list. That was the important part. I don't want to
That's
air
what I
anybody's
hear in
dirty laundry.
publishing. I
Yeah.
don't know, but what a like timely and needed topic. So what was the program? What was an example of like an intervention that would happen through the program?
Yeah, so I mean, these guys, go out on the street and literally they're not armed, they're not wearing bulletproof vests. All they have is their charm, charisma, and the conflict resolution skill set
Mhm.
that they've been trained on. But mostly, it's about uh, access and their reputation, who they were in the streets before.
Okay.
So it's primarily formerly gang involved
Mhm.
individuals who have sort of flipped the script in their own lives and are intervening, with people who still respect them and hold them in high esteem, right? And so it is different when you have a social worker just out of school who is saying, hey, you don't need to you know take it to that extreme or commit an act of violence, to resolve this conflict. And somebody who is actually from the community, who grew up there, who is living that lifestyle, and them saying you can put your gun down, that this doesn't have to be resolved with violence, right?
Wow.
And that carries a lot more weight, right? That carries a lot, that has a lot more influence. Um, and part of it, Teri, part of what, there's a thing in creative writing of, show, don't tell, right?
Mhm.
You've probably heard that in
Oh yeah.
writing circles or story circles. And a large part of the book and our intent with the book was we wanted to both illustrate that essentially, like, you know, the academic speak is violence is a learned behavior that is reinforced through social and cultural norms, right? But to actually show that, to illustrate that, you know, through all of these exposures and experiences where that becomes the default for conflict resolution. And if you don't resolve your conflict, right, through violence or retaliation or what have you, you then become a target, right? You then become like, oh, this person's a punk. They can be pushed over. They can be attacked. So that was the first thing that we wanted to show, not tell. The second thing that we wanted to take people through is to show how this program works so effectively through these organic relationships, right? And so we went through how this approach to public safety actually goes, deeper than maybe traditional law enforcement strategies or tactics would,
Mhm.
right? And so that was our intent. And from a writing perspective, one of my favorite compliments that we had gotten from one of the reviewers was that it was written like the guy who does Jack Reacher, but with a social conscience, right? So I think Lee Child is
Yeah.
his name. And so that was part of what we wanted to be eminently readable, right? And so we used a lot of the techniques that are in the kind of thriller genre, or
Yeah.
that kind of potboiler genre, to articulate this sort of social justice mission.
It makes total sense when you think about like he's on this mission and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
I just imagine the big guy who plays him relative to when Tom Cruise played him.
Oh, yeah.
They're different
What a
sets.
contrast.
Yeah, they're both effective in the role. But
Yeah, yeah,
I read the
yeah.
first book. I've read two of those. But that's an interesting. I love the example. I was gonna say that's an interesting, a really cool example of taking something that works over here, right? And something like an adjacent, like in my world, it's like, okay, this is, you have X kind of product, but this is a very, very, very different category. But look at what they're doing and why it works. And you can bring that over here. I feel like
Yeah,
the, the style that pulls you into that thriller and this guy who's on this mission and quest, you pull that into what you did. And that,
yeah.
I think that's a neat example of borrowing,
Yeah.
right? Like
Well,
a,
and I can actually tie it back to what we were talking about with units and narrativity at the beginning of the conversation as well, because I've obviously spent a large part of my career in this public safety, community violence interruption space, right? Nearly, well, over 20 years in different capacities. And when you look at the sort of narrative, right, around uh, crime, you have like three main drivers, right? The first of the narrative is that our attitudes, just in general, our attitudes, and the fear that accompanies those attitudes, right, far outpaces actual statistical data, right? When you think about it.
Mhm.
So, meaning that, when you mention Chicago or you mention most urban environments, people still have this knee-jerk reaction of like, oh, I travel a lot for my job, and everywhere I go, when they hear I'm from Chicago, they're like, but is it safe?
Oh my gosh. I
Right?
mean, really? Yeah. Oh
Um,
yeah.
and it's because we've formed these emotional attitudes around fear, and what urban environments represent, right? That aren't grounded in reality or backed up by the statistical data. Um, so even as crime stats go down, you see increases in more hardened law and order, traditional law and order approaches, right? Militarization of the police,
Mhm.
increased incarceration, all of those things, right? So that's the first thing. And those are all narrative. And then when you think about how that narrative is fed, and this goes back to that storytelling piece, right? That narrative is fed as much by the nightly news as it is by every episode of Law and Order, right?
No, yeah.
By CSI. And these things are happening, Teri, on an unconscious basis, right?
Yep.
We are tuning into it. So if we are exposed to one of those Law and Order marathons that's on TV and just keeps cycling one episode after another, and you're like, if we're exposed to that continuously, then the data isn't going to register in the same way as those stories. So a large part of the disruption of that narrative was, if we are going to introduce and tell new stories about how alternative programs are effective, we need to take some of the same things that work, you know, from a storytelling perspective, some of the same techniques from Law and Order, and apply them in this context, or Jack Reacher, right? And apply them
Yeah.
in this context. You know,
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I see all of the possibilities for you could using a framework, as you call it, right, as it is,
yeah,
in helping you figure out your message, which is like,
a
I'm
hundred
like, I'm
percent.
gonna bring you into what I do with my
Yeah.
clients.
Well, but yeah, absolutely, because that's part of the, I mentioned we've worked with a lot of um, like health startups, and most of the origin of a lot of the health startups are, personal individual stories of impact, right?
Of course. I
Somebody,
mean,
you
aren't the
know,
best products come from someone's own figuring out a way out of their own problem?
exactly, right? Like, oh, somebody sharing that, I'm thinking of like two past clients where, one had been diagnosed with breast cancer, and that changed her entire outlook to, she was an MD, and it changed her entire outlook to how the field was, because as she put it, after our work together, right, like, we are essentially just treating people after the problem has emerged, right?
Mhm.
After the cancer diagnosis, or diabetes, or what have you. Yet there is a whole functional medicine approach, right, to actually preventing some of this. And so it should be, healthcare is actually, sick care at that point, right? So that's one thing that comes to mind, and her story in navigating that was really powerful at articulating like this functional medicine approach that she had developed.
I was gonna say
Um,
she must have. It sounds like she developed an approach and kind of transitioned into more preventative medicine, like for
that's
cancer
correct.
prevention.
Yeah,
Wow, cool. Where is
yeah.
she located? Who is this
Well,
person?
she's actually, I want to say, um, Iowa or Idaho. Iowa. She's based in Iowa. Yeah, yeah.
Nice.
And then the other was somebody who, you know was a bioengineering student but had diabetes type 2, and was basically like, oh, all of the apps that exist to monitor glucose, to do all of these things, like, aren't as efficient and effective as what I've built, but like I didn't have the language to actually articulate that in the space and to connect the dots between my own personal experience and the product itself, right? And so a large part of our narrative framing work was like, okay, let's understand, you know, what people's concerns are. How the narrative framework works is once we identify what what narrative your issue lives in, then we go through, similar to most comms approaches, what are the audiences we need to reach or influence, right? We were talking before we started that one of the biggest pitfalls that folks have is like, oh, this product is for everyone, right?
Oh, yeah.
And in health that may be true, right? But there are folks who essentially, like, there are folks you need to reach that are higher priority, right? And who can help leverage other pieces. And so then we have what we refer to the core of a narrative framework is a story map, where let's identify these audiences that we need to reach. Let's identify the action that we want them to take. What is the barrier that they have to taking that action? And then how can we turn that barrier into a question, right? What is preventing them from taking this action or purchase? Well, it may be that they've been burned by tech products before, right? Or they're just tech resistant, tech reluctant. They're not early adopters, right? So turning that barrier into a question and then curating stories that answer that question to help them overcome that barrier and take action.
I love it. I love the idea of a story map. I mean, and beliefs and barriers are huge, right? Like it's like you gotta find one you can work around. What and
Yeah,
it's usually the secondary audiences, right? Like that
right.
are not as niche, that where there are more barriers, with the biggest one being it's just easy to keep using what you have, right? Like
It's just,
that's
it,
the number one, I mean, like the solutions already exist. Like people now you want them
it's
to
like,
change, right? Like
I had a friend who we used to meet at this diner, and he would always order a Reuben. And I'm like, Franco, why the Reuben, right? And because he'd always say like, nah, like it's how's your sandwich? Meh. And Franco,
really? And
why
you
the
still get the
Reuben?
same, yeah?
And he goes, well, I know what I'm gonna get
Yeah.
when I order the Reuben. I don't know what I'm gonna get when I order the Monte Cristo,
Even
right?
though it was meh, he still kept doing it. Isn't
It
that
was
compelling?
meh, like
Yeah.
like
See?
meh. It was
Yeah.
okay. It was
It's easy
fine.
for people
It
to
was a
just keep,
Reuben.
yeah,
you
familiarity
know?
and all these
And I
things that,
feel like I always
ah.
think of that because I feel like so many of us just make meh decisions,
Oh, don't
right?
get me started on that.
Like,
That's a whole other episode. Like it's
right,
easier to
yeah,
go with
but
meh.
right, but that's
It's
what comes from, right? That's what comes from not following your hunch.
yeah, and you're missing out. And if you're doing it in business, you're probably gonna regret it at some point.
100%,
Although
exactly.
when I keep eating, usually if I order the same thing every time, I'm worried that I won't like the other thing as much as my staple. I
Yeah,
want my
well, and
staple, but not. I don't
it
like.
wasn't like meh. Like it wasn't like, oh, this is
Eh,
disgusting. It was just like meh, like eh,
okay.
eh,
Oh,
right?
Reuben, the Reuben. His name. What was his name?
Franco, yeah,
Franco and the Reuben.
Franco and the Reuben, yeah, the
Oh
Franco
my God.
Reuben principle.
Yeah. Yeah, there we go. I'm gonna. I literally like. I'm sitting here trying not to look down, but I'm writing Reuben.
Yeah,
So you're gonna. It's gonna come back next time we talk. Oh my gosh,
right.
Reuben and Franco at the diner. Um. Okay. Before we wrap, I just one quick
Yeah,
question. My earlier when you talked about that moment when you're like, I've got to. Of course, this worked. I've got to go do this. When you had all the data and everyone's like, meh, and then this documentary shows what's happening and now everyone's bought in. I mean, that just like, oh my gosh, it's so true for all anyone who is in, I think, the business of any product or service offering, and they're trying to sell it, get buy-in, communicate it in a way that will get people to lean in. You're trying to pitch for investment or get somebody to buy in your idea, and you're showing them all the stats. We'll be we all nod along with, of course, just show them
Yeah,
an example or a story, and that's what I always try to bring a story in everything I do. It's not always easy on the fly or easy for people. Some people are very linear or very literal, I
yeah,
should say. What will be a tip for someone who feels like they need something besides the data to show
yeah.
to get?
I think one of the biggest blind spots we have, right, and this is true even of really talented storytellers, right, is that we're not necessarily strategic about the stories that we tell, right? And so part of what when I'm coaching, part of what I'm helping clients to see is there's the story you're telling, there's what that story is signaling, and then there's the story that your audience is hearing, right? And most of us, the really good storytellers, are really focused on the story they're telling. So they don't concern themselves really with what is being signaled, right? They just naturally, it's instinct, it's hunches. They're going off of people's facial expressions. They're going off of body language. They know, okay, I've got a captive audience, and they're laughing at all the right parts, and so I know what this is. And chances are somebody who I often say somebody who is a really talented storyteller is harder to work with on doing storytelling than somebody who's coming in cold and doesn't know anything about storytelling,
I,
right?
I would say the same for really good copywriters. Like the
Yeah,
super
yeah.
creative people. I'm like, okay, yeah, but that's a little. I don't know that somebody's gonna get that. That's like too metaphorical, and you don't want to. I don't want to. I'm not creative, so I don't. I don't want to put a damper on the creativity. But it's like you're gonna rein them in.
Yeah, well, and also it's sort of like right, if you're thinking about your moves when you're dancing, you're going to trip over your own feet. If
Yeah.
you're thinking about what you need to distill and signal strategically in a story, whether it's written or expressed verbally, right? You're going to end up stumbling over your own feet, right? You're going to overthink it. You're going to, oh, okay, like, how is this going to come across? Whereas if you start in that signal bucket, right, and you say, okay, this is what that story needs to impart, and then go to that audience and say, okay, and this is what I need them to hear to take away. And so if you go back to why we developed that story map in the first place, a large part of it is all the stories that you're curating, whether you're the one telling it or it's content that you're sharing from somebody else, or you're identifying individuals who you want them to share their story on behalf of your product or the issue that you're trying to advance. All of that should be aimed at helping the audience overcome that barrier, right? And so a large part of what we're curating is the message that that audience is receiving, and creating alignment between those 3 points: the story being told, the story being signaled, and what the audience is receiving.
To think about what you want them to
So
receive.
yeah, so for
Right?
your
Like
listeners who are coming
yeah.
in, and you can get really obsessive about this. I'm not encouraging that. um, but I think the starting point should be thinking about your end user. What audience are you trying to reach with this story, and what message do you want them to take away from it,
Yeah.
and then work backwards from there.
Got it. Love it. Yay. I love tips. We
Yeah.
all love practical tips. Not that we don't want to work with you, Josh, but like we
Yeah.
all
Oh, absolutely. I get it. I get
you know.
it.
Well, thank you. It's been so fun. Thanks for being here
Yeah, for
today.
sure.
It's such, an honor to have you here and you spend their time with
Thank you.
me. What's the best way for someone to get in touch with you?
The best way, and being able to avoid having to spell my last name, is to just reach out. Oddduck.io is our website, or email me, josh@oddduck.io.
Easy. Okay, oddduck.io or
Yep,
josh at oddduck.io.
that's it.
Cool. We'll include that too when this goes
Awesome.
live.
Thank you.
Yeah. As a reminder to everyone listening, the show is brought to you by the Vibe Method. The Vibe Method. Make sure I say that clearly. I feel like I talk too fast. It's a process we use and teach innovators and marketers to help them nail their unique angle, their unique customer story, and prove it will work before they go live. To find out more about how we can help you nail what we call a killer vibe before you go live, you can go to gohunch.com. That link will be in the show notes. Until next time, always remember the worst thing you can do with a hunch is ignore it.